You may be wondering why I included Peter Kalmus twice in this course. First in the documentary on Being the Change, and now in the book of the same title upon which the film is based. In fact, I find this reading to be more akin to Project Drawdown than the documentary on Kalmus. Project Drawdown gave us a glimpse of the big picture, what we needed to do to globally bring down greenhouse gas emissions. However, as someone noted in our class very aptly, quote, most of the solutions are not things that I can do personally right now. I cannot switch to wind power, solar power, nuclear power while I'm currently living on campus. I also cannot implement agricultural practices or improve my rice cultivation methods. Well said. So in contrast, Peter Kalmus looks at what each of us can do to draw down our own greenhouse gas emissions, like bike and eat with the climate in mind. True, we have been discussing these things for a number of weeks now, but not through the eyes of a scientist. As a climate scientist, Kalmus is able to do the same sort of calculations that we saw in Project Drawdown, but in his case, he focuses on the issue in a far more personal way, which I find fascinating. For example, he notes that when he went vegetarian in 2012, it reduced his greenhouse gas emissions by about 1,500 kilograms of CO2 or equivalent gases per year. Going vegan reduced his emissions to an additional 1,000 kilograms per year. As he notes, Kalmus's vegetarian and veganism hence reduced its food emissions to 400 kilograms of CO2 or equivalent gases per year, which is 0.4 metric tons. It's great he can do this with such precision. Since he also began growing food and trading surpluses with neighbors, presumably this number is even lower. What is interesting here is that Kalmus is not just calculating what sort of emission reductions are possible. He is actually testing to see if this is possible, let alone rewarding. He also does a great job of bringing the relative impact of his actions into focus. This is him. Kalmus quoted, "My 5 most effective actions were quitting planes, vegetarianism, bicyclism, vegan, and composting." In this class, we have, of course, talked about cars, planes, and animal products as a problem. But Kalmus not only underscores that these are major issues, he shows how to act on them and the results. Kalmus also draws seemingly little things that might escape our attention into focus. For example, I'm again quoting Kalmus here, when we first moved into our house in 2008, there were 5 pilot lights emitting a whopping 1,600 kilograms of CO2 per year. This translates into 3,500 pounds or 1.5 metric tons of CO2 emissions per year. And recall that each of us should annually be emitting no more than 2 metric tons. So I'm curious which reductions in particular that Kalmus made and Kalmus and his family made interested you the most. For example, he notes that by switching to using a clothesline, they reduced their household CO2 emissions by 550 kilograms. That's over 1,000 pounds, over half a metric ton. This one little change is equivalent to an enormous amount of other things. Pretty amazing. Note, too, that there is an incredibly small amount of CO2 embedded in a clothesline, especially when compared to the manufacturer of a clothes dryer. Because he is a climate scientist, Kalmus really likes to back up what he says with cold, hard facts. For example, and this is again Kalmus, the average American diet emits about 2,900 kilograms of CO2 or equivalent gases per year, which is about 3 metric tons, and can hence completely blow your carbon allotment. Another eye-opening statistic is that each dollar spent on stuff represents roughly half a kilogram, that's over a pound, of embodied CO2 emissions. That's a rough calculation, but it's pretty accurate. And that's counting manufacturing, packaging, and shopping. As, Kalmus notes, the average U.S. person spends a little over $6,000 a year on new stuff, average emissions are something like 3,000 kilograms of CO2. Which translates into 3 metric tons for each American, and hence also completely blows your individual carbon allotment. Kalmus also notes that U.S. landfills emit 1,300 kilograms, i.e. 1.3 metric tons of CO2 or equivalent gases per person per year. Let this sink in for a moment. Our society has reached a point where even one person's trash, taken by itself, generates more CO2 than the average person in Bangladesh does. It's a remarkable number. Well, You might expect Kalmus to focus solely on personal actions. Nonetheless, his chapter on collective action reveals that he has more holistic views of the situation. For example, he succinctly notes that global warming is a market failure. Burning fossil fuels imposes huge costs on society that aren't included in the price of the fuels, primarily by causing global warming and respiratory illness. It's crucial to fix this market failure because few of us will voluntarily stop burning fossil fuels in a society that is still strongly rewarding this behavior. That's why I noted or asked the question of whether we needed a climate guard, a vanguard. So, as Kalmus notes, he takes up the question of activism in order to balance his focus on personal action. Quote, "In this chapter, I presented my options and opinions as a human, not as a scientist. Although my job is to do science, as a human, I have as much right to respectfully express my opinions as anyone else. I've done so here in order to balance my emphasis on individual action and emission reduction elsewhere in the book." So I'm interested to hear what you make of both Peter Kalmus's approach to the climate crisis through personal action, as well as his underscoring the need for climate activism as well.